Alright, the next step in designing a game in the design stage is identifying your mechanics. So the 4 parts of this are going to be filling in a basic gameplay loop, trying to choose between basic tabletop mechanics that I'll go through, looking at any social mechanics that might be able to be part of it. It's number 3. And number 4 is looking at some advanced tabletop mechanics. So this is, we'll get into that in a second. So first up, filling in the basic gameplay loop. So a really good way to design games is to try and look at them as everyone's doing a series of actions that are all linked together and that contribute to each other over and over again until someone reaches a goal. Alright, so in terms of Monopoly, you're going around the board until someone makes enough money to win the game. With Uno, you're going around and picking up cards and discarding cards and matching cards until someone runs out of cards, and then you win. In Virtual Reef Diver, everyone is trying to identify certain cards according to categories and collect resources that help them survive events that can reduce the number of cards you have, with the overall goal of having the most cards and 1 point by the end of the game. So it's all a loop, and everything contributes to everything else in the system. So the 4 parts of filling in a basic gameplay loop that you can use, not all games are like this, but this is just a helpful place to start, is first looking at the role that the players are going to be playing, so and a goal for them. So what are they trying to do the whole time in the game? The kind of actions that they can take to interact with each other or with the system in front of them, and then the kinds of resources that they might have at their disposal. Alright, so with the role, role is really helpful because it helps define in your players' minds and your own sort of what they should be doing and what resources they should have available. So if we had a game about gold mining, you're all gold miners, so you have to go and find the gold. And your goal, I guess, would be get the most gold by the end of the game. When is the end of the game? I don't know, maybe when someone gets to 100 pieces of gold. So what you can also do is gather some data about the gold sort of that you're gathering and where it is, and use that to try and suss out where you might want to dig. So the goal, then actions. So if you're gold miners, obviously digging is probably one. Prospecting, you could go into sort of selling the gold if you wanted to. You could go into, maybe as actions, you can like interfere with other players if you want. You can sort of maybe move equipment around, all of those kind of things. So at this identifying mechanics stage, you just want to go into the whole thing, like, okay, what are just all the possible things that we could do? And then the choosing mechanics stage will refine that. And part of choosing mechanics will be looking at defining a budget, because you might not be able to afford to have like a giant section of the country map. So or heaps of dice or little figurines, or who knows, or maybe you do have the money to do that. So yeah, it'll help choose your mechanics, but we'll get to that later. Finally is resources. So resources are things that players can gain and then expend, and whether that's they gain them at the start of the game and then sort of spend them, or whether you just collect them across the course of the game and they're like your victory points. That's a type of resource, but they're things that you gain them through gameplay while you're playing, and then spend them during the game, or just collect them, or whatever. So resources are things that you gain. Actions are things that you can do. Goals are what are you trying to do the whole time, and the role is sort of who you are in this game. Having just a list of those things will be really good for helping you fill in your basic gameplay loops if all those quadrants have something in them that you can refine from. Next, basic tabletop mechanics. So because we're dealing with a physical kind of realm, the total number of things that you can do in terms of sitting at a table and playing with other people is going to be, it's not going to be necessarily infinite. So there will always be new ways of playing games, and new mechanics are made up all the time. But some of the basic ones that you can use are this. You can have movement. You can have collecting. You can have spending. You can have combining to get some effect, which is also counts as spending. I'll put a big list of all of these in the corresponding materials. But generally, if you've gone through and looked at your actions and your resources, it will be not obvious, but you'll be able to sort of think of a few things that the players will be able to do that are some of the basic mechanics. And they all have different uses as well. One thing I would recommend is not overflowing the game with mechanics at this stage in terms of applying some in. So you might want to have a game where you're collecting cards, and then you keep them, and sometimes you might spend them to save the rest of your cards from being lost to some random events that come up in the game. That's okay. You don't want to then tack onto that like, oh, okay, well everything has a cost as well, and then you have to gain those resources from somewhere, and then you have to do this and that and this and that. Like, start simple, and if you need it to be a bit more complicated, then you can make it more complicated later. Step 3 is identify some social mechanics. So in terms of games about data science or science in general, social mechanics there's a lot of collaboration in science between different people and teamwork. So social mechanics is not only like, can I debate with you? Are we trying to convince people to vote for something? Are we trying to convince other players to do certain things on our behalf, or, you know, that gets us closer to their goal? In games like Cards Against Humanity, there's also the social mechanic of deception and deduction. So people, not so much Cards Against Humanity, but there's games like Avalon and Coup and stuff like that. I'll link those games and some videos so you can have a look at what they are. But social mechanics are cool because they mean that players will have a vested interest in following the activities that are happening in the game. So in Virtual Reef Diver, one of the social mechanics that we have, there are some cards that can be drawn which require all the players around the table to do a vote for which type of organism will be saved in the event of a sort of like a bleaching event or a cyclone or something like that. So it can just really help your players to be more immersed in the game, whether or not it's collaborative or competitive. The final point is some advanced tabletop mechanics. So I'll list these in the addenda, but the key ones for advanced tabletop mechanics include doing things like you can have sort of a dashboard of settings and activities that players rely on and frequently tweak. So it's not just collecting a card and then spending a card. You might have the collecting of multiple resources. So before I said don't overwhelm your game with mechanics, which is true. You don't want to do that. But this is the space of the process where you can go, well, if we did have some extra mechanics and some extra space for some more complicated things, what can we do? So advanced tabletop mechanics, yes, so you can have sort of like a dashboard of heaps of different resources that you can use. So maybe you need to collect fuel and electricity and funding and people and that kind of thing, and then the cards that you have require different amounts of those resources, so you have a little kind of like an odometer for each of those resources. So just collecting piles and piles, they sort of tick up and tick down as you spend them and gain them. That's one thing you can do, advanced resource collection. You can integrate an app into your game. So perhaps when players if you have a board, maybe every sector of the board possibly has some information that you can get from it, whether that's with a QR code or you enter a certain you enter a certain number that's on there into an app and it tells you things, or you can have certain bits of information that you need to get from the app that's relevant to the game, that kind of thing. So putting down ideas that seem quite complicated is probably what you should do in this part. Anything that's more complicated than a basic thing like draw a card representing going out and gathering data from the field can really help you just keep the simple ideas separate from the more complicated ones, because it's probably best to have a few more basic ideas and then one or two complicated ideas so you don't overwhelm the audience. Next up, we're going to talk about defining your budget, which will really help you decide how many of those advanced mechanics you can have, because advanced mechanics need advanced components. So yeah, we'll chat about that in the next one.